This is an independent fan channel and is not affiliated with or endorsed by Hassanby. All content is created for commentary, education, and news purposes under fair use. All right, let's get to it. Let's start off with the U.S. and El Salvador doubling down on mistakenly deported man despite court order. We're obviously going to be talking about that. It's a pretty significant deal. It is a turning point for the United States in a sea of awful things that the Trump administration has done. We're back at it again. We're back at it again in this field where the Trump administration is actively defying the Supreme Court's unanimous decision on the facilitation of wrongfully deported man from Maryland back to the United States of America. As you guys know, as I've talked about over and over again over the past week and a half, this is a truly horrifying situation. It's unconscionable, it's immoral, and it is also unconstitutional. They're kidnapping people, they're disappearing people into El Salvador, and it's very obvious that this is the modus operandi. They're not going to change it. This is one day after the highly anticipated Oval Office meeting where the president of El Salvador, Nayib Bukele, said he would not return a wrongly deported Maryland man being held in his country in the CCOT anti-terror facilities. The federal judge who ordered his return will hear from the Trump administration's attorneys at a court hearing on this wonderful afternoon. Okay, that's going to be happening in a couple hours. We're, of course, talking about Kilmer Garcia, who is now entering his second month in the El Salvador mega prison after he was deported there on March 15th, even though there was a 2019 court order that barred his deportation to that country. Okay? That means that in an immigration court, Kilmer Garcia was found to, one, not be a member of any gang whatsoever, but more importantly than that, specifically not deportable to the country of El Salvador, given that he was not only not a gang member, not a member of MS-13 at all, but also beyond that, he had actually given information up on a competing Salvadoran gang, which put his life in the crosshairs if he were to ever return to El Salvador. This is precisely how he got a 2019 court order for a withdrawal of removal. A withdrawal of removal has a higher standard to clear than a pure asylum application. Okay? Is there feedback? Is there echo? What's going on? Are you guys messing up with me or... Yeah, he had sufficiently proven in court that he was endangered. Okay, he had delivered information on a Salvadoran gang in the past as well, which put his life in harm's way if he were to ever return to El Salvador. Do you understand? Trump administration officials, on the other hand, claim falsely that Abrego Garcia, who escaped political violence in El Salvador in 2011, is a member of the criminal gang MS-13. And yet they have provided zero evidence. A withhold of removal. Did I say withdrawal? Oh, God damn it. I mess this up every time. A withholding of removal. Okay? It is, you go to the courts, there's a couple different things you can do as a migrant, as an immigrant, as an asylum seeker. Okay? Someone who is escaping political violence. Okay? One of the things you can ask for is a withholding of removal, which means that as a Salvadoran, as a Salvadoran man, as someone from El Salvador, if you come to the United States of America and seek asylum on U.S. soil and prove in a court of law that you are escaping political persecution or any sort of like serious violence, that you can make it so that it is illegal for the government to deport you to El Salvador, even if you haven't processed your asylum eligibility, even if you haven't completed your asylum application, even if you haven't completed your immigration status, for example, that still means that the government cannot remove you from U.S. soil and send you to El Salvador. And that's precisely what the American government did. And not only did they do that, but they kept lying about how he was a terrorist, how he was an MS-13 member, how he was a terrorist. It is disgusting. And it is just pure white nativist, white supremacist, anti-immigrant garbage. And yet, seemingly, given the past couple of years of uninterrupted, unrestricted, white supremacist, anti-immigrant garbage that has dominated the airwaves, there is very little pushback that was developed in this process. People are not ready and well-equipped to actively fight against such a thing. Do you understand? Audio is glitchy. Is it? Why are there people who are saying that there's echo and that there's audio that's glitchy? I genuinely can't tell if people are messing with me or not. I genuinely cannot tell. Anyway, now, for those of you who don't know the background of this deal, this scheme that has been put together, the Trump administration has set up an arrangement where they are paying El Salvador $6 million to house migrants deported from the United States as a part of President Donald Trump's immigration crackdown. $6 million. Okay? Small price to pay for having a slave labor colony where you can just make people disappear to. Okay? This slave labor colony also is not beholden to U.S. constitutional protections, of course. It's like Gitmo on steroids, basically. And yesterday, there was obviously a meeting in the Oval Office where Attorney General Pam Bondi and Stephen Miller spoke on the matter. Let's take a look at the ABC News coverage on this, and I'll talk about it a little bit more.
Legal showdown over a wrongfully deported Salvadoran national. The Trump administration is resisting a Supreme Court order to facilitate the man's return to the U.S., and El Salvador's president refused to send the men back in a White House meeting with President Trump. Senior national correspondent Terry Moran has the story.
Unfortunately, withholding is a final order of removal that is withheld, but the government can exercise that final order at their discretion. That is also false. You are wrong. The federal government could technically remove the withholding order, okay? They could, but there's a process to do that. The Trump administration did not do that. In that court process, you have to go through the details. You have to go through what this person has done, go through their background, and detail out exactly why the previous court order was wrong. They did not process this application at all. There was no due process whatsoever. And to take it one step further, a federal government immigration attorney unironically admitted that they had up. This is why we are having this conversation right now, because when you look at all of the data that civil rights groups and immigration advocacy groups have compiled at this point, 90% of all of the people that have been deported to CCOT right now in El Salvador have no crimes, no criminal background whatsoever. 90%. The only reason why we are talking about this Maryland man is because the federal government admitted that they had engaged in this wrongdoing, specifically because he had the background. He had the previous court order. And yes, Aaron Reichlin Melnick, who I rely on quite a bit, senior fellow at IMM Council, has put together a wonderful presentation of the timeline of Abrego Garcia's gang allegations and what the facts are and what the fictitious nature of the claims are. I'm going to get to that in a second. Let's look at what the Trump administration is saying first and foremost.
Good morning, Terry.
Good morning, George. It's a nightmare scenario here. The Trump administration admits it mistakenly deported Kilmer Garcia to that notorious prison in El Salvador, and now they say the U.S. is powerless to get him back, despite an order upheld by the Supreme Court to bring him home. This morning, a stunning comment from President Trump caught on a live streaming camera before reporters were in the Oval Office, telling the president of El Salvador he'd like to send American citizens convicted of crimes to prisons in El Salvador.
I said, homegrowns are next. The homegrowns. You got to build about 5 more places. Yeah, that's big. All right? It's not big enough.
Minutes later, with reporters in the room, Trump said he wants Attorney General Pam Bondi to see if the law allows this.
I'd like to include them in the group of people to get them out of the country, but you'll have to be looking at the laws on that.
The president musing that this proposal could help with America's prison population.
I'm all for it because we can do things with the president for less money and have great security. And we have a huge prison population.
And it isn't the first time Trump's threat.
Yeah, not only are they doing this to non-citizens, they want to do this to citizens as well. Just remember, this is how it slowly but surely turns into something that is illegal. It turns from something that the government is doing that is completely illegal to something that is legal and expected. Okay? It doesn't happen overnight. It took decades to get to this point in the post-war on terror, post-9/11 era in the United States of America. There's clearly a lot of appetite for this kind of violence from a big chunk of the population who does not understand how terrifying this is, who have no capacity to demonstrate empathy for their fellow man, and therefore they're championing this because they think this is immigration enforcement. Donald Trump recognizes that immigration enforcement is a big part of why he won. So he's doing all of the erosions of due process and the erosions of the First Amendment over immigration enforcement. But it's not going to stop at immigration enforcement. Once you can do anything and everything you want to non-citizens and you eradicate due process, you can just simply consider citizens to be non-citizens as well. And once you clearly deport them to El Salvador, to this terror facility, it seems like even the Supreme Court cannot demand that you bring these people back. This is where we're at. If the Democratic Party does not actually fight back against this, if people don't make a big fuss about this, if people don't actually go out and not only protest, but also try to desperately get more people on board with how unjustifiable this action is, we are cooked. America is officially within the 1930s Nazi Germany arc, okay? The Burger Reich.
To send U.S. citizens to prisons overseas. In February, he said this.
I'm just saying, if we had the legal right to do it, I would do it in a heartbeat.
All this is Kilmer Garcia.
When will you advocate for more forceful resistance against the Nazi government? Just curious what the line is for you. Orhan Abi, that's a very funny and interesting question to ask someone who has to maintain a platform to consistently inform the broader public. Yeah, dude. The answer is never, okay? Are you stupid? Of course I'm not going to advocate for violence. Are you crazy? Is this bait? Are you a federal agent? Do you know what my job is? My job is to educate the masses, okay? Please.
A Salvadoran migrant, husband and father living in Maryland, languishes in that notorious Salvadoran prison despite a court order that the administration must bring him back to the U.S.
Big homie's looking at the Trump administration doing Nazi stuff and going, hey, why won't you agitate for people to engage in direct acts of violence so that we can send you to the El Salvador facility, as a matter of fact? Yeah.
Yes. The government claims Abrego Garcia is a member of the MS-13 gang, but a federal judge said last week they have offered no evidence to back that up, and he has no criminal record here.
Hassan, do you know anyone in immigration at the state level? I'm desperate as man. It's been 2 years of headache. No, I do not, especially not under this government in any way, shape, or form. I'm sorry, Jake and Bake. I literally don't know. And I don't even know where to begin on that stuff to,
Here or in El Salvador. And the Supreme Court last week unanimously ruled.
Also, why the dog? It's getting worse. Dude, I'm going to be honest with you, Jake. Jake, it's just you and me right now. Listen to me. Stay the in China. What are you doing, dude? You literally lucked in. You already lucked in. You speak Mandarin. Just work your way up the ranks. Meet the members of Chinese Politburo and stay the in China. You are already living the dream. What is wrong with you? Why would you come back here? Why would you want to bring a wonderful Chinese netizen to the horrible U.S. soil? You are already living in the future. Become the white monkey that we all dream of becoming one day. What the are you doing? He loved burger too much? So do the Chinese. China is the most Amerifat-coded nation on the planet. I keep repeating this over and over again. The Chinese people love America. They love American culture. They love American commodity consumption. Y'all are crazy. Chinese love burger, okay? China has burger. China has the most burger. What are you guys talking about? Like, the one thing China doesn't have is blood in video games and skeletons in video games. That's it. That's like the biggest L. Other than that, they got it all. Calm down, everybody.
That the U.S. government must facilitate Abrego Garcia's return, calling his removal illegal. Trump at first said he'd abide by the Supreme Court's ruling.
If they said to bring him back, I would tell them to bring him back.
Now the administration says their hands are tied.
That's up to El Salvador if they want to return him. That's not up to us.
But in the Oval Office, the president of El Salvador made clear he's got no plans to send Abrego Garcia back to the U.S.
How can I return him to the United States? Like I smuggle him into the United States, or what do I do? Of course, I'm not going to do it. It's like, the question is preposterous.
The Democratic leader of the House calling on the courts to use judicial powers.
Virtually every single person from the administration and people in their sphere of influence is just lying on this man. So let's talk about the actual truth. Let's talk about the background of Abrego Garcia. This is Aaron Reichlin Melnick, senior fellow of IMM's counsel, updating this timeline to fix a typo and error in the last box, presenting the full version of Mr. Abrego's time in the U.S. using court documents to explain the allegations of gang membership and what actually happened in his case. Here it is, okay? Entry and early life. Hold on. 2011 to 2019, okay? Kilmer Abrego Garcia flees El Salvador to the U.S. at the age of 16 after M18 gang members extort his family and threaten to kill him and rape his sisters if they didn't keep paying. He moves in with his U.S. citizen brother in Maryland and lives there without trouble for years. Then comes, on March 28th, 2019, the PGPD arrest. Kilmer is arrested for loitering outside of a Home Depot while looking for day labor. A Prince George's County Police Department detective grills him about whether he's a gang member. He denies any involvement. 4 hours later, he is transferred to ICE custody without the PGPD charging him for any offense. In April 2019, here are the allegations. At a bond hearing, ICE claims Kilmer is a part of MS-13. They submit one piece of evidence, a gang field interview sheet, a GFIS, filled out by the PGPD detective that claims Kilmer is a part of MS-13. The GFIS says he was wearing Chicago Bulls gear, and two, a confidential informant allegedly claimed that Kilmer was a ranking member of the Westerns clique, which is in Long Island. Except, there's a problem there. Abrego has never been in Long Island. He's never been in New York at all. So this evidence is fabricated. And lo and behold, the local detective, as a matter of fact, that accused Mr. Abrego Garcia of being a member of MS-13 was suspended from the police force and indicted merely weeks later for providing confidential information to a sex worker who he was paying in exchange for sexual acts. That's right. I repeat, the cop who initially attested to Abrego Garcia's alleged MS-13 membership was subsequently suspended and indicted for serious professional misconduct. Remember, we're talking about a cop here, okay? If a police officer, a detective, is fired and suspended and indicted for misconduct, that means they must have gone above and beyond. Do you understand what I am saying? And the confidential informant that he used was also unreliable. The evidence itself that they presented was immediately disproven, and I'm going to get to in a second, okay? But remember, the Maryland police officer who formally attested to Abrego Garcia's supposed gang affiliation in 2019 when he was first detained the first time was subsequently suspended from the police force for a serious transgression, giving confidential information about a case to a sex worker the New Republic has established. This officer, apparently a senior detective in Abrego Garcia's case in 2019, is named Ivan Mendez, according to information provided to Abrego Garcia's lawyer by, at the time, Lucia Cruel, who is also a member of his current legal team. Mendez was subsequently indicted for his offense, pleaded guilty, and received probation. So that's another thing. So let's continue. An investigation follows in the summer of 2019. Kilmer's lawyers reach out to the PGPD to investigate these claims. They find out that, one, police did not even file an incident report about his arrest, and two, the detective that had filled out the GFIS has been suspended for an unknown reason. We now know what the reason is. I just described to you what the reason is. In August 2019, there is an IJ decision. At his final bond hearing, ICE declines to offer any evidence of gang membership other than what is in the GFIS. The IJ denies bond, finding that the GFIS is sufficient proof of membership at the time, despite noting its obvious flaws. Kilmer appeals this decision to the Board of Immigration Appeals. Now remember, the immigration courts are an extension of the federal government. They're an extension of ICE, okay? So you have the process where you can appeal to the Board of Immigration Appeals, but ultimately, this is somewhat irrelevant because the erroneous decision making there is it's basically an extension. It's a processor of what the federal government or what the immigration enforcement authorities want to do. That's all they're there to do. They're rubber stamping this stuff, okay? The immigration courts are under the DOJ, part of the executive branch, and not under the judiciary. So just remember that. Having said that, the only reason why I'm mentioning this is because something silly and frivolous like this that is immediately disproven can still cause someone to basically be branded as a member of a criminal organization when there's no evidence whatsoever for it. Okay? What is the point of those courts if they just 100% accept everything anyway? It's a way to create paperwork, so to show that there's some sort of process. It's the same principle behind FISA courts. The FISA courts are there to rubber stamp warrantless surveillance and offer them a warrant, right? But it's better that even that exists than not have it exist at all, if that makes sense. Although it is still a rubber stamp protocol, it's still good that even that rubber stamping of the protocol exists as opposed to not existing, because when it doesn't exist at all, then you have no paperwork, you have no way of holding up this process, you have no way of stopping these sorts of things from happening. Okay? Now, withholding when the immigration judge rules on October 2019 that Kilmer is ineligible for asylum because he filed the application too late, but the judge does grant withholding of removal, finding that it was more likely than not that he would be subject to persecution if deported to El Salvador. A removal order is issued, but with a restriction that one country he cannot be deported to is El Salvador. Okay? Then comes the BIA decision, the Board of Immigration Appeals decision in December 2019. Kilmer appeals the bond decision to the Board of Immigration Appeals. The appeals board declines to find clear error in the immigration judge's decision to rely on the GIFIS document. However, he is released anyway because he had won a withholding of removal. He returns to normal life from 2019 to 2025. By all reports, Kilmer lives a normal life in Maryland with his U.S. citizen wife, their biological son, and his 2 stepchildren, with the work permit he received as a result of his grant of withholding of removal. He works legally as a sheet metal worker, joins a union, and raises his family in a D.C. suburb. He doesn't get into any trouble with the law in these years. And then on March 2025, he gets sent to CCOT. On March 12, 2025, ICE and HSI agents arrest Kilmer in his car in front of his son. 3 days later, he's transferred to Texas, where, thanks to an admitted administrative error, he is put on a plane to El Salvador and sent to CCOT. So this is just a person that is married, that has immediate family members in the United States of America, that was falsely smeared as an MS-13 gang member, and every step of that process, there was enough evidence to suggest that not only was he not an MS-13 gang member, that he was directly at threat by MS-13 gang members if they were to send him back to El Salvador. Okay? If they were to send him back to El Salvador, that MS-13, he's so not MS-13 that they would kill him. That is what the courts have found. And yet, every single person still that, on the one hand, admit that they falsely deported him are simultaneously claiming that he is an MS-13 gang member, and also that it's good that he is in El Salvador, and there's no way to bring him back. Okay? In a normal process, in a just world, Obrego Garcia enters the United States fleeing El Salvador because of fleeing the gang violence in El Salvador, and expeditiously gets an asylum claim that is granted to him. Clearly, if there is a withholding of removal that a court gave him, that literally means that there is enough here, or more than an asylum application, as a matter of fact, more than just a simple asylum application. This means that there is additional evidence that he's presented as to why he cannot be deported to El Salvador, and that a judge oversaw this evidence and said, yes, there is enough evidence here for you not to be deported specifically to El Salvador. Okay? It's more than an asylum application. It is a higher standard of clear than an asylum application. It is shocking I guess. I guess it's not really unexpected that the administration would be this careless and this inconsiderate because they are fascist. All right. But just so you know, when people say he is MS-13, that is a lie. Okay. That's just a lie. He is so not MS-13 that he is directly in the crosshairs of MS-13, at least according to an immigration judge that said, we can't deport this man to El Salvador specifically. There's enough evidence here to suggest that we cannot, because he is so not MS-13, we cannot deport him to El Salvador because they'll kill him in El Salvador if he goes there. And yet here we are. So this is where the chart is from. And for a more comprehensive written version of the timeline where Mr. Abreu's presence in the U.S. using the same sources, check out this great piece from Roger Parloff, senior editor at Lawfare. He wrote extensively on the details and the timeline of events. Okay? Now, I want to point to something here. The very fact that we are even covering this story is because the administration, the immigration attorney on the federal side admitted that there was an administrative error, because there was one, right? There was an administrative error, and they admitted that there was an administrative error, which turned this into a bigger story. There are plenty of people that this administration has actively deported that did no wrongdoing whatsoever. Some of them were temporary protected status holders. Some of them were in the process of seeking out their asylum claims. Some of them had been in the country for longer than they could actually process their asylum claims, so they potentially could not get an asylum claim, but they should get one, that they should get amnesty, right? Under normal circumstances, in a world where we have a normal process for immigration, we would file amnesty, conditional amnesty to all of these people, 90% of them that have done no wrongdoing whatsoever, and now they're in a torture slave prison for the crime of crossing an imaginary boundary and wanting a better future for themselves and their children. Kidnapped in the street. Some of them so falsely and erroneously kidnapped from the street that ICE itself, in the process of said kidnapping, will recognize that it's not the right person. Manuel Gutierrez, sent from New York to El Salvador prison, although family says he has no criminal history or gang ties. He's 19 years old. A 19-year-old Venezuelan in New York City reportedly was apprehended by Trump administration immigration authorities and deported to El Salvador, despite agents realizing he was not whom they meant to arrest in a targeted operation. These are called, I believe they're called like collateral, something along, I forget what the term is that ICE uses, but they'll say like it's a collateral arrest. So, you know, wrong place, wrong time, doesn't matter. We can boost our numbers this way. Manuel Gutierrez, whose family opened an asylum case after arriving in the U.S., was deported from the Bronx to the notorious CICOP prison in El Salvador, despite his relatives' insistence that he has no ties or criminal history, no gang ties or criminal history. Yeah, he was a collateral detainee. According to Documented, a newsroom dedicated to telling stories of immigrants in New York City, the Gutierrez family says it has been left without information or answers. The team was detained alongside 237 other Venezuelans on February 24th by ICE. His father, Wilmer Gutierrez, told Documented, "I feel like my son was kidnapped," because that's precisely what happened. "I've spent countless hours searching for him, going from one precinct to another, speaking with numerous people who kept referring me elsewhere. Yet after all this, no one has given me any information or provided a single document about his case." The elder Gutierrez reportedly said he overheard ICE agents saying that his son had not been the person they had come to get. "The officers grabbed him and two other boys right at the entrance of our building. One said, 'No, he's not the one,' like they were looking for someone else. But the other said, 'Take him anyway.' Gutierrez has no criminal record either in Venezuela or the U.S., his family said. He also did not have any tattoos, which is a feature that U.S. law enforcement often use to link people to Tren de Aragua, a transnational criminal organization from Venezuela, and to justify their expulsions from the country. The points-based system that they have for determining whether or not someone is a criminal gang member is already ridiculous. This is precisely the reason why that gay hairstylist was kidnapped and deported, because he had mom and dad tattoos on his arms. Or that other person who works with children with disabilities who had an autism awareness tattoo dedicated to his autistic cousin. That's why he was kidnapped. There was another person who had a Real Madrid tattoo with a crown and a soccer ball. That's why he was kidnapped. It's ridiculous. And now all of those people are now in this torture prison with seemingly no way of returning them. But the only reason why we're talking about specifically Abrego Garcia is that unlike those people, Abrego Garcia had a previous court order that said you cannot deport him to El Salvador, and yet the government violated that previous court order anyway. And on top of that, the Supreme Court found that the federal government has to facilitate the return of Abrego Garcia in a unanimous decision. And yet, the Trump administration is claiming that the Supreme Court actually gave them all of the power here because it's a matter of foreign policy. It's not a matter of foreign policy. We have determined wrongdoing in the past within the immigration enforcement system and have even demanded El Salvador return people that we sent to CCOT. The Trump administration has done this. Every administration prior, in the process of mass deportations, because we have a cruel white nativist immigration agenda, have falsely sent people overseas and sent people to countries that they are not supposed to be sent to. And then we have followed through. CEO of Bad Takes. Yeah, I'm the CEO of Bad Takes. Do you have a good take? Do you have a counter to anything that I'm saying? Do you have any sort of counter narrative here, or are you just simply going to go, la la la, he's Mexican and therefore terrorist, sucks to suck. The Great White Hope is fixing the country, right? That's what you're going to say. I know they were MS-13. Yep, there you go. No, they weren't. I just spent the entire past hour. If you understood the English language, if you had the processing capabilities, you would know that no, that person was not MS-13 at all. Sorry, just arrived. Yeah, well, you're a moron, okay? Not confirmed by the detectives either. The detective that wrote the erroneous report literally was subsequently suspended from the force, like a couple weeks after he sent in that report. The report itself had two key pieces of evidence that suggest that Abrego Garcia was MS-13. Do you know what those pieces of evidence were? I just covered it earlier. One, that he had a Chicago Bulls hoodie? Ridiculous. That's not an indication that anyone is an MS-13 member at all. And the second piece of evidence was a confidential informant, which, by the way, was not even a confidential informant. It was just one of the other guys at Home Depot that the detectives had actually nabbed that falsely claimed that Abrego Garcia was a member of an MS-13 gang that was based out of Long Island. Abrego Garcia had never been to Long Island. So how the was he a part of a Long Island MS-13 gang when he had never been there? There is no more an open shut court case than this one. It's ridiculous. And yet people who are severely mentally backwards, mentally stunted, refuse to reckon with the reality in front of them and instead just go back to the same old dumbass takes where they're like, nah, I don't care, dude. He's a MS-13 gang member. They rape children. He was raping children. In your mind, you have to fantasize about this guy being the big bad, because otherwise, God forbid, you entertain the truth that this person is not a member of MS-13 and he was falsely shipped off to El Salvador, even though a previous immigration court had decided he cannot be sent to El Salvador specifically because of how not MS-13 he is. I like to think that the cognitive dissonance demonstrated here by a lot of people who try to defend the administration's actions, especially when it comes to immigration enforcement, the reasons why they fantasize about how violent and dangerous this person was not only because they have this white supremacist dog in them that causes them to think every person that's brown is actually a child rapist MS-13 gang member, but also because deep down they know that if a person who is clearly innocent is shipped off into a slave labor colony overseas with no means of returning this person, that's kind of up. So they just don't want to believe the up thing. So they delude themselves into thinking, no, it must not be up. Even when the government admits that they up. That part that scares me is that trans people are next. Every single day I watch all this happening, knowing my number's about to be called. You're fine for the time being, I think. But, anti-trans legislation is already popping off all over. Maybe not deportation.
To pressure the administration.
The Supreme Court and or the federal district court actually needs to enforce its order.
Abrego Garcia's lawyer spoke with our Lindsay Davis, and he says he personally has worked with the Department of Homeland Security to bring back clients from other countries after winning their cases in court. Quote, he said, "We're not asking anybody to do anything illegal. We're asking them to follow the law." George?
Terry, this is very likely to go back to the Supreme Court absent any evidence that the administration is actually trying to get him back.
Absolutely. And the problem that the Supreme Court has is that they have no enforcement mechanism for the order that the administration is under. They have to count on the president to obey it.
Terry Moran, thanks very much.
In today's Capitol Close-Up, we welcome Maryland's Democratic Senator Chris Van Hollen to discuss the latest developments.
Yeah, I really like what Chris Van Hollen is doing, and I really hope that other Democrats take notice of it and also participate in this. And yeah, I think what he's doing is good. And also demonstrates bravery as well. He's technically putting himself in harm's way by doing this. If he actually follows through on this and goes to El Salvador, much respect to him. I think that it is time for doing exactly this.
Regarding Kilmer Garcia, the Maryland man wrongfully deported to El Salvador. Senator, it's always a pleasure. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Steve, good to be with you.
So a lot to get through, obviously, in a short amount of time, but let's focus right now on Kilmer Garcia. I know you reached out to the embassy here in D.C., the embassy of El Salvador, to try to request a meeting with the president of El Salvador while he is in D.C., meeting with President Trump. Have you had any success?
I've not. I reached out to request that meeting to talk about the, as you say, illegal detention of Abrego Garcia. We've not heard back from the president at this point in time.
You also mentioned if you didn't hear back, then you'd be willing to go to El Salvador. Is that still the case?
Yes, it is, Steve. I'll be going later this week. If he's not released, we still hope that he will be released. But I think it's important that we go to El Salvador to show his family, his wife, his mother, his brother, his kids, that we're not giving up on this because, as you indicated, the Trump administration has admitted that this was done in error.
This is the first time I'm not even joking when I say this is the first time I've felt even a modicum of confidence. A modicum of confidence and competence coming from the Democratic Party. Okay? This is what our public servants are supposed to do. They are supposed to uphold the law no matter what. They're supposed to defend their constituents no matter what. Abrego Garcia is a constituent. Okay? This is brave. This is bold. This is what the expectation is from all Democrats. I do not care about his other takes. I don't care about anything right now with the exception of this initiative. Okay? He is right. Is the idea that any adversary is MS-13 the American equivalent of they're all Hamas? Yes. I worry they will fumble it like they only care about this case because it breaks the law. No, this is a very, very important thing. This is a very important thing that they're doing. It's a very important step that they're taking. Okay? And by the way, this is in some ways not dissimilar to how Doctors Without Borders operates. Like when you're a white guy, when you're a white American citizen, when you're a white man who's an American citizen, for example, you have a certain set of privileges that put you at a higher categorization as a target by any state, okay? When you're a senator on top of that, you have literally the top level priority. So things that other foreign nations can do to you reflect on America as a whole. Do you see what I mean? He's a congressman. What the Yeah, no, that's what I mean. Protective presence is what they call it for the olive harvest. This is incredibly important. Like, I think this should be, is your arguments optics, guys, but unironically, because I agree. No, this isn't just optics either. This is putting your body on the line. You're using your privilege as a shield. You're using it at the very least, as a way to refocus people's priorities and attentions to this incredibly unjust deportations regime. Do you see what I'm saying? This is actual action. I think that a competent Democratic Party would quite literally send an entire coalition of people armed to the gills with immigration attorneys and civil rights litigators down to El Salvador on a mission all together, okay, and make themselves impossible to deny, make themselves impossible to avoid. That is precisely what should be happening here.
And you can't just send somebody off to a notorious prison in El Salvador and say, whoops, that was a mistake. And that's why the Supreme Court, by a 9-0 ruling, said that the Trump administration had to facilitate his return.
So a couple of things. One, to your last point of sending someone to this notorious prison, is it more of an argument in your favor that this is someone who was not necessarily deported, but deported to the prison? How much of an impact does the prison make as opposed to someone being deported to El Salvador?
Well, both. I mean, he was here under protective status, and this is why the court, both the federal district court and the Supreme Court, determined that he can't just be essentially abducted from the country, that he gets his due process rights. That's a fundamental value that we have in this country. That's why the courts have been unanimous in their rulings here.
So now there's this legal limbo.
Yeah, if something happens to a U.S. senator, it becomes an international incident. It reflects poorly on El Salvador, and Trump looks weak if he doesn't respond to any provocations by El Salvador. Exactly. Do you see what I mean? Like, this becomes a major issue of consequence for the Trump administration if, as the American president, he literally lets El Salvador, a much tinier, much less powerful nation, dominate not only American citizens like this, but literally a senator. Do you see what I mean? Ooch, ooch, ooch. Do you see what I mean? Nah, they'll just say the senator was a terrorist. No shot. I don't think Americans will stand for it. I disagree that Trump will look weak to his base. He'll just support it. They'll love that a Democrat is being hurt. No. I think you guys are wrong, and I think you're misunderstanding Trump's base in general. Yes, there will be the Asmongold coalition, but they are far from it's an unknown senator. Dude, it's a senator. What are you talking about? Why do you think the cartels don't touch American citizens and literally turn around and apologize when they accidentally kidnap or, God forbid, kill an American citizen? What happens if an American citizen is harmed by any citizen, like a traveler, okay, a tourist, accidentally gets kidnapped by the cartel? What do? They assassinate the cartel members that actually did wrongdoing to the American citizen. Why? Because the American passport is a reflection of American hegemonic power, okay? That's a literal random American that we're talking about. Not every country is like Israel, okay? Israel gets to do whatever the it wants, but other countries cannot get the Israel exemption, okay? You are crazy. This is not Rashida Tlaib either. This is not Ilhan Omar. This is a white guy, dude. A white guy from Maryland. What are you guys talking about? The same principles, the same fundamentals that allow Americans to turn a blind eye to all this injustice because it's happening to brown people, white nativism, white supremacy, is the same principle that will cause them to pay close attention to a white man, senator from Maryland, going to El Salvador. You can't do certain things to a guy like that. I think the old rule set is dead, my guy. No, this will cause tremendous instability, okay? What is happening in chat, by the way? You guys are so pessimistic. Okay, you guys are so pessimistic that you're like, what? What's the alternative? That he do nothing? What is happening here?
That Kilmer Garcia is in. The president of the United States is saying he can't do anything about it. It's up to the president of El Salvador. The president of El Salvador said yesterday at the White House he can't do anything about it. He doesn't want to do anything about it. His contention is that this is a Salvadoran citizen who's being held in El Salvador, and he considers him to be a terrorist. President Trump could do something about it, but at this point he says he's leaving it up to El Salvador. Okay, so that's the backstory there. The Supreme Court said that you have to facilitate this. He's caught in legal limbo right now. So even by going to El Salvador, Senator, what can you do? What plan might be in place now if this is someone who is caught between the presidents of two countries, neither of which is making moves to bring him back to Maryland, your jurisdiction?
Well, you can call it legal limbo, or you can call it outright defiance of a court order. And that's what President Trump is doing. He's defying a court order. Everybody knows that if he makes a request to the president of El Salvador to bring Abrego Garcia back, that would be complied with. After all, we are paying the government of El Salvador the money to keep these individuals detained. At the same time, the president of El Salvador when he claims he has no power to release him, it's absurd. And this throwing around the term terrorism when this person has never been convicted of crime just shows the lies that we're hearing. I mean, that was just such an outrageous, bizarre episode at the White House the other day, where everyone's sort of saying, you know, I'm not going to let him go. I'm not going to try to let him go. I mean, this is in defiance of a court order. This country has stood for the rule of law and due process, and I'm going to go to El Salvador to try to see Abrego Garcia and also talk about his release. I will point.
You underestimate the anger, Hassan. Mike was right. The Democratic base is reaching a boiling point. What are you talking about? This is why I'm saying senators like this and actions that are taken like this is actually a good thing, because it causes people to pay attention to what's going on. What are you saying right now? That this goes along with the anger and resentment and frustration that people experience. This is quite literally the point.
And out, Steve, that the Congress has to approve funding.
This is infinitely more directionally appropriate than what Cory Booker was doing, okay?
From the United States to El Salvador, and I'm not going to support one penny if this Marylander continues to be illegally detained there.
Senator, when you're a member of Congress, you have tremendous power, okay? I know that Donald Trump is actively trying to undermine the legislative body, and the Republicans have actually taken a lot of initiatives in that direction and have successfully undermined the legislative body, but you still have some powers in your hands, okay? As a senator, you can just get a coalition together and try to revoke any sort of like foreign aid going to El Salvador, for example. Like, these are things that you can advocate for. You can veto the pre-existing aid that's going to El Salvador. You can try and veto Trump's $6 million scheme, for example. Like, there's a lot that you can do. They have power. If they didn't have power, Trump wouldn't be actively trying to undermine the legislative body's power to begin with. Okay, 25% El Salvador GDP is U.S. aid. There you go. Shout out to Jim Jones for popping a senator at People's Temple on foreign land, ironically proving your point because he got flamed for it and investigated. Yeah. Oh.